make our ears attentive to your wisdom, and incline our hearts to understanding. We cry out for insight and raise our voices for understanding. Surely, if we seek it like silver and we search for it as treasure, we will find the knowledge of God. Amen. Everybody buckled in? Today's going to be fun. I know in advance that not everybody's going to be real happy with what we hear. That's okay. There's a lot of stuff in here we don't talk about very much for a variety of reasons. I like to be the jerk that looks for those things and points them out because they're in here and they're important to us. And it's not my job to tell you what you want to hear. It's my job to figure out as best I can how to take these words and teachings and the calling of God and apply them to our lives and teach and pray and bring that forward in the world. So, bear with me. One, this is really near and dear to my heart, so I might run a tad bit longer than I usually do. We're usually pretty good on time, so that's okay. But two, I'm sorry in advance. Now, bear with me as we read from Acts chapter 4, verses 32 for 35. For once, I didn't have to change the reading. Now, the whole group of those who believed were of one heart and soul, and no one claimed private ownership of any possessions, but everything they owned was held in common. With great power, the apostles gave their testimony to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and great grace was upon them all. There was not a needy person among them, for as many as owned lands or houses sold them and brought the proceeds of what was sold. They laid it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to each as any had need. All right, are we uncomfortable yet? Because it's going to get worse. This from the book of Acts. Acts is the sequel to Luke. So the same guy that wrote the Gospel of Acts was like, well, that's up to Jesus' resurrection, right? And kind of the immediate aftermath and Jesus' ascension. The book of Acts then says, what do we do with this, right? Mark wrote, and we talked on Easter about Mark just ends at them finding the empty tomb. That's it. Matthew wrote his gospel, and in Matthew there's a little bit more, right? He meets with the apostles, he tells them a couple things, and then gone. Luke says, that's great, but what do we do with that? Where do we go? Where did the church go? These people that had followed Jesus, that believed in him, that wanted to keep this moving, what did it mean for them? How did they live that out? We have the book of Acts, Luke's contribution. And this is actually repeated. You get almost this exact same thing word for word in Acts 2. So this is not like a little aside or an accident. It comes up twice, almost the same each time, just in Luke, in Acts here. They were together, sharing one heart and soul, and they had all things in common. Do we hold all things in common? No. That's scary words, isn't it? The last 100 years of American history is largely us collectively working against an ideology built around doing that, right? Right? But the early church, the early leaders of the church, the people that knew Jesus, the people close to him, when Jesus left, their instincts, their idea of how we live this out is we get together and we share everything we have to make sure everyone is taken care of. There was not a needy person among them is twofold powerful. One, this is a reference to Deuteronomy 15, right? I said it would be on the test. Everybody likes to quote when Jesus says there will always be poor on the earth, right? That's half a sentence from Deuteronomy. The rest of it is, but there shall be none among you. Because we do all of these things to make sure we take care of each other. And there will be no poor among you. So on the one hand, this is them trying to fulfill the law in the way that Jesus commands, not by these kind of technical things that it lists afterwards, but by just making it happen in the spirit of the law, by sharing things. And secondly, this is really amazing, because as we've talked about before, the people that were in the early church were the bottom rungs of Roman society. The most common insult that the Romans gave about Christians is it is a religion fit only for women and slaves. That is what the Romans said about it, because it overwhelmingly attracted day laborers and slaves of various kinds. It attracted all kinds of prostitutes, single women who had very few roles. That gets slightly complicated in Roman society, but people who are on the outskirts, the fishermen, right, that Jesus recruits for his disciples, these are all the people that struggled to get by day to day. And when I mean struggled, I mean this. When we dig up bones, I'm getting closer. When we dig up bones from first century in this region, Judea and Galilee to the north and Syria and that, unless you're part of that 5% of Roman population that has their estates and everything, we cannot find a skeleton that does not show evidence of starvation. I need to repeat that. Literally everyone who wasn't in that top few percent spent enough of their life starving, it affected their bones. Everyone in this book, in the New Testament, Jesus and Peter and John and Mary and the other Mary, like every person in here spent enough of their life starving that it affected their skeletons. And we can see it today. So to say that there was not a needy person among them is huge. They had to share things to survive. Now, the people that did have stuff, and there were a handful, right, that had lands and houses. This is where, by the way, churches met. They didn't have buildings. They just, whoever in the community actually had a house maybe or something of their own that could hold people, they met there. Or they met outside in somebody's yard or something, near a home. The people that did have lands and houses, largely, this is actually single Roman citizen women who were attracted to the religion, because in Roman law, women had property rights and they had public rights so long as they remained unmarried, but as soon as they married, all that was gone. So single women found the church really interesting because it was a place where they could have respect, because single women in Roman culture were not really respected. They just had to have rights because they didn't have a man to give their stuff to. They had some stuff. So it was probably mostly them selling lands and houses, but a handful of other people early on as well. Sold their stuff, brought the money to church, and offered it to take care of people. That is what offerings are for. That is where we started gathering together money, right? They didn't do it to build their buildings or pay electric bills or clergy. They did it to feed people and to house people and to make sure they had a set of clothing. And it doesn't say they rented out their land so that they could take the profits from renting it out and put it in. No, because that's not terrible, right? There's nothing inherently wrong with that necessarily. But people needed to eat now. And that possible kind of long-term vision of, well, we could get a better return on investment if we do it this way, doesn't help the people starving now. So they sold it, and they brought it, and they took care of people. To anyone who had need. Didn't matter why. Didn't matter who. They fed everybody. They didn't even know everybody. Didn't matter. If they were part of this community, if they were willing to come by and throw in their lot with the church, they were fed. You didn't have a place to go? Well, he's got an extra room in his house. Let's go live with him. Yeah? That's what they did. You don't have guest bedrooms. You have rooms for other people in the community that don't have a place to stay. That office, that's somebody else's bedroom now. Because nothing was their own. Because everything we have is God's to share. I am just the steward of it for now. God hands me this collection of things and says, take care of people with it. And I say, okay. So I don't have $1,000 as my bank account. Whoever needs that $1,000 has $1,000. That's scary, right? All right. The first major argument in the church, by the way, if we go 2 chapters after our reading today, is about food. Okay? So when the church gets together, do they sit? We have 2,000 years of the church arguing over like theological technicalities, right? Go through like the 300s and the 400s, and it's just like church council after council after council after council to figure out the exact wording of how Jesus is related to the Father and the Spirit. And then we have centuries of, the Protestant Reformation and all this stuff, right? What are we arguing about? Words on paper, which is fine. It's not that it doesn't matter. But you know what the church argued about in Acts 6? The first reason the church decided to reorganize and have a big old meeting and decide to do something is because some people were getting missed in the daily distribution of food. And they decided they needed to set up a way to make sure everybody was eating. They created the first title outside of apostle, deacon, and the deacons were charged with taking all the stuff that was brought to church and making sure all of it went to feeding people. That was the first position the church created, the feed everybody job. Everybody. Now, this wasn't just first century. I want to be very clear. It starts this way. This is not like the end of this story. There's a very famous church leader named Ambrose, Bishop of Milan. He did a lot of stuff. He wrote a lot of stuff. Kind of a jerk sometimes. But when he came to lead in Milan, it was because they were having a big theological argument. And he came in to try to calm everything down. And they were like, both sides were like, you are a great guy because you've given away so much to take care of the community. We just are going to put you as bishop. He was not a leader in the church. He hadn't been baptized yet, all right? And they're like, no, you know how to take care of people. You're in charge. So, in a week, he sold off everything he owned and gave it all away and got baptized and moved to Milan. And day one, this part of the story, probably apocryphal, but it got passed along because it fits with the stuff that he says and does. First day, everyone walks into the church. This is 400s, by the way. They have churches at this point, like buildings. Everybody walks into the church, and it is empty. Everything is gone. All the candle holders, all the plates and stuff, and the books, and they probably didn't have instruments. They were kind of anti. Sorry, I'll stay over here. That's my bad. Everything was gone. And Ambrose was just standing at the front. So everybody kind of filed in and stood, because they didn't have pews either. Everyone just filed in and stood around. And when it was time for service to begin, he screamed at them for hours, "How dare you have nice things when there are people in this community in need? How dare you?" He yelled at them for hours about the church having stuff when people in town didn't. This is one of the most powerful church leaders of the 5th century. There's another guy I'm a big fan of. His name is St. Basil the Great. He has a collection that he wrote a little bit, created some organizations, very well respected in his time by his compatriots. I have a collection here of some of his sermons, and I know it's cheating to just read some part of somebody else's sermon as part of my sermon, but I need to do it, because we all need to understand a couple of these things. I'm going to read a slightly longer chunk at first, and then I'm going to go back and read a slightly shorter chunk that I think will hit a little harder. Okay, bear with me. Real sermon given in a major city to a large congregation. What did you bring into this life? From where did you receive it? It is as if someone were to take the first seat in the theater and then bar everyone else from attending, so that one person alone enjoys what is offered for the benefit of all in common. This is what the rich do. They seize common goods before others have the opportunity, then claim them as their own by right of preemption. Did you not come forth naked from the womb, and will you not return naked to the earth? Where then did you obtain your belongings? If you say you acquired them by chance, you deny God, since you neither recognize your Creator, nor are you grateful to the one who gave these things to you. But if you acknowledge that they were given to you by God, then tell me, for what purpose did you receive them? Is God unjust when he distributes to us unequally the things necessary for life? Why then are you wealthy while another is poor? Why else but so that you might receive the reward of benevolence and faithful stewardship, while the poor are honored for patient endurance in their struggles? But you, stuffing everything into the bottomless pockets of your greed, assume that you wrong no one. Yet how many do you in fact dispossess? Who are the greedy? Those who are not satisfied with what suffices for their own needs. Who are robbers? Those who take for themselves what rightfully belongs to everyone. And you, are you not greedy? Are you not a robber? The things you received in trust as stewardship, have you not appropriated them for yourself? Is the person who strips another of clothing called a thief? Yes. And those who do not clothe the naked when they have the power to do so, should they not be called the same? The bread you are holding in your cupboard is for the hungry. The clothes you keep put away are for the naked. The shoes rotting away with disuse are for those who have none. The silver you keep buried is for the needy. You are thus guilty of injustice towards as many as you might have aided and did not. Or, as my preferred version of it from a later French writer is, everyone is guilty of all the good they don't do. Here's the one that really hits, in my personal opinion. Thus, those who love their neighbor as themselves possess nothing more than their neighbor. Had you clothed the naked, had you given your bread to the hungry, had your door been open to every stranger, had you been a parent to the orphan, had you made the suffering of every helpless person your own, what money would you have left, the loss of which to grieve? This was not an unpopular opinion in the early church. This was not an unpopular opinion in the medieval church. We just don't like it. We like our stuff. You do. I do too. Not saying I'm not guilty of this as well. What we want desperately is fluffy platitudes that make us feel comfortable, right? What we want is for Christianity to be about if I think this and I say this, and then I can do whatever, and when I die, things will be awesome. Don't tell me people don't think that way. You cannot tell me people don't think that way, because people do. Not everyone, but a lot of people think that way. Not in here. No Joel Osteens in the early church, okay? Can't happen with this in hand. Doesn't work. We want a church collectively. We, not you, not me, not one over there, whatever. Collectively, modern church wants a challenge that's just social, right? We, for whatever reason, have said we just want unpopular opinions on things. That's our cross to bear, right? To say unpopular things at most, so we can differentiate ourselves from everyone else, and otherwise be just as kind of mean and greedy and whatever, and get by. And that's what it is. That's not in here, right? Bonhoeffer, popular 20th century writer, called this cheap grace. Actually, there's another line in here that's really good about this. I've been reading this a lot lately. I know many who fast, who pray, who sigh, who demonstrate every manner of piety, so long as it costs them nothing, yet would not part with a penny to help those in distress. So many people who that is their vision of what it is to be a person of faith. That's not what the church did. Church had a vision for life, abundant life, and life that is now, not just in the future. Because the whole point is to live in the kingdom now. Like, we're practicing here, right? It's not just we live here and it doesn't really matter, because when we die, there's this totally separate thing. You read Paul, we don't go somewhere else. God comes here in the end. That's the whole point of the Advent season. 19th and 20th century Christianity came up with this whole goofy idea that we go everywhere else. God comes here. We're supposed to be practicing here. Early church artwork, okay? They didn't have churches at first, but when people were buried, and they put artwork around their burials and stuff, you know what it always is? It's Jesus as a shepherd, wearing just a robe with a stick, and people. It's the Garden of Eden rebuilt. It's always beautiful gardens and plants and flowers and food everywhere, and people hanging out, running around between trees and stuff. No conquering armies, no book of Revelations, a quarter of the world is killed by the sword, none of that. You know, early church barely included the book of Revelations in the Bible. It was so unpopular. That was not their vision of how the end was happening largely. It was new life, where we got together and we shared everything and everybody was okay. That's what we talked about on sermons on justice, right? We go back to the Old Testament and we're talking about the prophets and they're talking about justice. It's never punishing people. It's making sure everybody has enough. Every time the word justice comes up in there, it's about making sure people have enough. So when we sing, oh man, when we sing in these songs that we sing, and we look at these words, when it talks about standing firm for godly justice, that's not punishing people who do bad things, that's giving people things who don't have them. It's the same thing as we have before, where we're one in heart and spirit, we're taking care, we're faithful servants to answer the calls, we're taking care of people. That's the songs we sing. What the book says. I try really hard as a person to live this, and it's real hard. I was reading some of the stuff out loud to my better half earlier this week as I was prepping for this, talking about how spending everything I have, that last chunk. She's like, "Is that why we never have any money?" I'm like, "Yes, because this is what we do. This is why we're so in debt, because we help everybody. Because that's what we're supposed to do." And we try so hard. That's the life we're supposed to lead. The church is about downward mobility. This isn't a place for you to get higher on the ladder in life. This is a place for you to lose everything for the sake of the call. Downward mobility. That's what the church built. That was what the community built in the aftermath of Easter. First Sunday after Easter, we're talking about what they did with Easter. So, why are we here? 2 centuries later, we're all still showing up at these gatherings. Right? Here and there, there's a church over there and a bunch that way. Right? We're all getting together. Why are we here? I can't answer that for you. I know so many people that show up because that's what their family does. And it's just repetitive. I know so many people for whom this is a place of comfort because they're used to it and things we're used to are comfortable. And because it says nice things a lot of the time, and those nice things are comforting. I know people who are part of churches because they want to feel better than everybody else. They do. They try to gussy it up differently, but don't tell me you don't know Christians who are like, I'm so morally superior to everybody else because of I'm part of this and I do this stuff. We know them. We know them. Right? Are we just a sense of curiosity? Right? Like, what are the imagine things, whatever. What is this book about? What are we doing here? What have I committed to? There's people that do it out of curiosity. There's so many people who are in churches out of fear. They fear what they don't understand. They fear what's coming after they die. They fear a world that's changing around them. They're in churches out of fear. Ooh, is this not a place for fear? A lot of people just show up out of inertia. It's just what they've done, and it's easier to keep doing what you've done than to come up with a different way to do it. That's not what the church is for. Not what it's. You can find all those things. You can find responses to fear in here, and you can figure out ways to deal with uncertainty, and you can find ways to feel better about yourself. Hopefully, not in contrast to other people, but feel better, right? You can find things here. That's not what the church was built to do. It's here to create a space for us to live in the kingdom of God now in preparation for living in it forever. And that means behaving in certain ways, maybe, but at the core of those is a shared life, acknowledging that everything is God's and we are here to share it. That's the point. It's hard and it's scary, and there's some really good examples out there if you want them, and there's a lot of really bad examples out there if you want them. But I sincerely, genuinely hope for the future of the capital C church that we reclaim some of this. We talk about the decline of the church a lot collectively in our ethos. The whole church. This church, the church that started sharing everything and making sure everybody had enough and putting their resources together and putting their skills together, that church grew so fast it toppled an empire. I want to be in that church. Amen. So I'm going to put some words.